Welcome to Human Monsters. Part 1. Charlotte Krasnick Klotzbach suffers the betrayal of incest. The following is an adaptation of Charlotte's memoir, Silent Cries, Memories of an Incest Survivor. A pivotal moment happened in Charlotte's life when she was 11 years old. Her parents volunteered to work at a church camp that summer, and, being so young, naturally Charlotte would accompany them. Charlotte's responsibilities that summer relegated her to the kitchen. One day she had an afternoon off, and swimming was prominent in her agenda. She went to the two-room cabin she occupied with her parents. As soon as her bathing suit was on, she suddenly became aware that her father was in the adjacent room. He was watching her. She could feel his leering gaze. It was as if she were wearing it too. Charlotte tried to cover up quickly. His assessment of the situation couldn't have contrasted with hers more. It's all right. A father has a right to see how his daughter is growing. It was hard for her to discern which iteration of the word right was more chilling, that it was appropriate for a father to examine his daughter's developing body, or that it was his right to do so. There were suddenly internal sensations that she didn't care for. Her father had a way of making her uneasy. He didn't have to do much. She used the front door as her only escape hatch. Even if she had swum in the ocean, she could never have scrubbed her father's leer clean from her epidermis. She couldn't have bled him out of her pores. Abort. She grabbed a large towel and ran from the house into the world, where she would find the only refuge availed to her, that being a place populated by strangers, where she was sure to be cloaked in anonymity. She dashed towards the ocean's abyss, where uncertainty offered better prospects than what awaited her within her father's looming shadow at home. Throughout the rest of that summer, Charlotte avoided her father as much as she could. When their congregation added only to 2, she was anxious to multiply. That was her life until her family returned home to Florida at the end of the season. Once Charlotte's family got settled back at home, the domestic tranquility she may have enjoyed years before was soon disrupted. One night Charlotte woke in the early morning hours to find that her father was sitting on the edge of her bed. The anticipation of what was sure to follow, given their previous interactions, grabbed her within its metallic and inflexible grip of anxiety and dread. Her father tried to alleviate her fears with what he perceived to be comforting words. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to touch you and show you things about growing up." This only added to Charlotte's fear. She tried to push him away. When that didn't work, she pulled her sheet up around her neck and compressed it tightly. She shuffled away from him as far as she could until she reached the wall. He finally got the hint and left the room. Charlotte trembled uncontrollably in his wake. She shook until her body was so exhausted from exertion and fright that she fell asleep. A few nights passed before Charlotte's father began making regular visits to her bed again. Every time, his approach would differ in that it would be more insistent and forceful. In fact, some mornings, Charlotte would show up at the breakfast table with a black eye, or a bruise, or scar elsewhere on her body. When her mother or anyone else in the family who wasn't her father asked about it, she would say she had had an accident in gym class or some other location outside the home. Charlotte lived in fear. It appeared to her that there was nobody she could turn to for help. She didn't want to tell her mother for fear that it would hurt her. She didn't tell her brothers because she felt they would not take an interest. She didn't understand what was happening and why. She couldn't bring herself to tell her church minister about it because he was so old school, he believed it was sinful for a woman to shave her legs. She was trapped in a world where she was subjected to heinous tortures, and it appeared that there was no justice, consequences, or even a compassionate ear to take in her story. A victim dwells in a lonely world, isolated, even when surrounded by thousands of people. Charlotte lived in constant paranoia at home. She was afraid to enter the bathroom, which could only be accessed by a direct route from her bedroom. Once, when she entered the bathroom, she discovered, to her horror, that her father was hiding behind the door. Months later, he lied to her mother and told her that he had been taking a bath and Charlotte barged in on him. Charlotte used her mother as a human shield of sorts when she was at home. She would make sure that as long as her father was present, she would remain firmly knotted in with her apron strings. If her mother wasn't home, Charlotte would come up with any excuse she could to leave the house. Even if it meant just going for a walk, she would. And before her father began abusing her, she wasn't inclined to do so. Charlotte was keen to fill her life up with as much activity as she could so that she could avoid being alone with her father. She accompanied her mother to church services and other religious functions. She also signed up for as many extracurricular activities at school as her timetable allowed. She became passionate about music and took flute and piano lessons. Getting involved in these pursuits imbued her with the safety and self-worth that had been stripped from her by her father. Charlotte's teachers often commented about how impressed they were with how mature Charlotte was for her age. She was looked upon with a similar perspective by her peers, who often elected her to positions of leadership at school and at church. What she couldn't tell them about this maturity that had emerged so prematurely was that it was the product of incest and sexual abuse. Charlotte's innocence was stolen from her. She was forced to contend and engage with adult behaviors and remain secretive about her father's shameful behavior. While Charlotte was in the 7th grade, she was hired to work as an assistant to the bookkeeper at a resort hotel. This worked out well for the most part. That is, until Charlotte's father applied for and accepted a position as a chauffeur at the same hotel. Charlotte's supervisor and mentor intuited that there was something inappropriate about their relationship, but she didn't pry. She accommodated Charlotte's discomfort by ensuring that Charlotte was never brought to work or brought back home in a hotel limo during his shifts. Charlotte couldn't avoid her father indefinitely, and things got worse at home. She still avoided all contact with him and would do things like put a chair under her bedroom door's knob to alert her to his presence if he entered the room at night. But he was crafty. He would always find a way in. A mother is keenly attuned to her children and can often sense when something is upsetting them. She heard a noise in Charlotte's bedroom one night during her 13th year. Charlotte's memory of the event is spotty, but she does recall huddling with a blanket around her on the floor of her walk-in closet after her mother chased her father away. She had tied a cord of some kind of very hardy fabric around the waist of her pajama bottoms, but it had been cut. She also remembered that she discovered the following morning that her bedsheet had been spattered with her blood. Her mother didn't bother to have Charlotte's father dealt with by the authorities, but she slept with her that night, and for many nights to follow. It worked for a while, but he was never daunted for long. Eventually, he took to reaching over to Charlotte as his wife slept between them. Her mother came up with other tactics to dissuade her husband from sexually abusing their daughter. Again, all it would have taken was a phone call to the police to stop it, but her mother felt like she could manage the situation. The woman concocted a booby trap consisting of a mechanism that was attached to the door. Metallic clothes hangers and a metal waste can were arranged in such a way that, were he to enter, it would make a noise, and the women could repel his advances towards Charlotte. These contraptions would work for a while, but again, he would always find a way. The family moved into a new house. Charlotte enjoyed the new location with its proximity to a lake. There was a pier from which she would go swimming. One day she was rifling through her father's desk looking for something when she discovered photos her father had taken of her sunbathing on the pier. It seemed there was nothing he couldn't spoil with his tawdry attentions. When Charlotte was a sophomore, she had a boyfriend named David. He was also a person of faith, and Charlotte felt comfortable with him. He was everything her father was not, and she was able to trust him. Charlotte's father was not nearly as taken with David as she was. He didn't want her dating anybody, but he especially hated David. Charlotte kept her relationship with David a secret from her father for the most part. Though she kept most details of their relationship private, one night when David walked Charlotte to the door after a date, her father rushed out of the house and assaulted David. An inveterate pacifist, David didn't fight back. He began to reason with her father, and eventually they diffused the situation. After that, Charlotte would not allow David to bring her back to her house. During Charlotte's junior year, her father slithered to Puerto Rico to do some volunteer construction work. Those months were very liberating, and she slept better than usual. But the time elapsed far too quickly, and, before long, he was back and his twisted, perverted sense of normalcy was reestablished. She wished he would disappear permanently. She was not a violent person by nature, but she was so resentful and enraged by this point that she could very easily picture herself bringing about his timely demise. At times, she would literally bang her head against the wall in frustration. From thoughts of killing him to killing herself, it seemed as though there was nothing about her life that was worth living. There are no real coping mechanisms for the trauma of sexual abuse that don't involve patterns of self-destruction. She thought of running away. She also wished that she could disappear by going to sleep and never waking again. How can you live with that much turmoil without becoming overwhelmed? Especially when you're a minor and the perpetrator of the torment is your own father. Ultimately, what she wanted was for the abuse and pain to go away. She wanted to explore life as a musician and see what might come her way. Her friends didn't have to contend with these issues. Their lives were simple, unencumbered by the entitlement and narcissism of a man who valued his own gratification over his daughter's well-being. Charlotte convinced her mother to talk to someone outside the family about the crisis. Up until then, her mother was very orthodox, insisting that one does not discuss their dirty laundry with strangers, that families should resolve their problems at home. The problem was, they had tried it, and found that Charlotte's father was undeterred. Her mother went to a church deaconess she respected. The deaconess responded by saying she could not conceive of someone like Charlotte's father being capable of committing such a vile act as incest. She accused Charlotte of being a liar. Charlotte's mother was too spineless to contradict the woman. Once again, Charlotte was trapped in chronic victimhood without so much as anybody to believe her. One night when Charlotte's father returned home from work, he brought 2 chocolate eclairs with him, one for Charlotte and another for her mother. This gesture, seemingly born purely out of kindness and generosity, led Charlotte to believe that he was turning a new leaf. She thought, how nice. Maybe he's changing. The eclair tasted odd. When she went to the kitchen to throw it out, white powder fell from the center of the pastry as she dropped it in the garbage can. The family grew their own oranges, and one day when her father was making juice, he gave a glass to Charlotte and her mother. It tasted bitter. Charlotte immediately went to the kitchen sink and poured it out. After the glass had been emptied of liquid, Charlotte discovered a paste of the same white powder she found in the chocolate eclair. She slept soundly that evening, a little too soundly. She shudders at the possibilities of what might have gone on while she was unconscious. Paranoid of what else her father had in store for her, she searched his dresser drawers while he was at work one day. There was a small bottle of chloroform concealed within a small white rag. There was a small strong box she was unable to open. There was a mix of pills. She never accepted any of his gifts of food after that. Her mother later emptied the chloroform bottle and refilled it with water. She threw out the pills. Her mother told Charlotte that she tried to persuade her father to undergo counseling. He began whining and crying, with his head in her lap, saying, "I don't want to do it," and "I just can't help myself." He vowed that he would never do it again, but it was an empty promise. Charlotte suffered as before. She noted that his behavior was at its worst when there was a full moon. The family moved back to Indiana, where they lived on a farm. One day, her father picked her up at school and made a point of passing an automobile dealership. He pointed out a red convertible and asked her if she would like to have it. She was 16 years old and licensed to drive, so he figured she couldn't pass it up. Charlotte didn't take him up on the offer. She figured there had to be a catch. Sure enough, he informed her the car would be hers for the taking, if only she let him have his way with her whenever he wanted. The terms of this agreement were unacceptable to Charlotte, so she said no. Her father was furious. She couldn't wait for them to get home so she could get as far away from him as she could. Charlotte remained in contact with David by writing letters. One day she received a letter that was filled with lecherous sentiments and profane language. It didn't take her long to figure out that her father wrote the letter so that Charlotte would become disillusioned with David. Charlotte's 2 youngest brothers moved in with the family. Charlotte didn't tell them about the abuse to which her father had been subjecting her. But there was one incident whose implications were not open to misinterpretation. One day, Charlotte was preparing for a day of playing with her school's marching band at an away basketball game. Charlotte was in the bath when she heard a noise at the door. She knew what it was and who it was, and she was rigid with fright. Her father burst through the door. Charlotte screamed and pulled a terry cloth housecoat over her body. Her father clawed at the housecoat, scratching her deeply on her left shoulder and breast. Charlotte's brothers were alerted to the scene after hearing Charlotte scream, and they raced to the bathroom to get a sense of what was happening. When their father heard them advancing toward the bathroom, he raced downstairs to his den. Her brother Titus was enraged. He raced downstairs in pursuit of their father. Her other brother, Merrill, checked with Charlotte to see if she was okay. Everyone except Charlotte's father agreed that it was high time she got out of there. She was not safe as long as she so much as shared an area code with her father. Merrill agreed to drive her to Fort Wayne so that she could take a train to Florida. Her mother and brothers pooled their finances together to pay for the ticket, and Charlotte packed a suitcase. They were in crisis mode, no time to wait. A friend of Charlotte's agreed to let her stay with her. Ultimately, Charlotte would learn that no place in the world is completely safe. During her journey to Florida, a man sat next to her and palmed her breast. It took months for Charlotte to feel settled enough at her friend's house to sleep soundly. Predators have a way of making their presence felt, even when they are physically absent. Charlotte learned months after leaving home that her father took most of her personal belongings and incinerated them in a bonfire. Her mother and her brother Elliot managed to save some items. Her father wasn't done terrorizing her. He sent her a letter containing no salutations, only a date, his signature, and the content. In a nutshell, he told her he disowned her and never wanted to see her or even so much as hear her name again. Though she was relieved to get away from him, it still hurt to receive such a message. She only ever wanted him to love her in the way that a father should, with appropriate expressions of affection. Deep down, Charlotte would never feel entirely sure that she was safe from him. Her mother told her that when her oldest brother, Norman, found out that her father disowned her, he confronted him. He told her father that he was no longer welcome in his home and would not be received there until Charlotte was accepted back into her parents' house. Though Charlotte was moved by this gesture, she also felt guilty about causing so much strife in the family, even if it really was her father who was the source of it all. After graduating high school and going to work, Charlotte found herself socializing with peers in her age group and, in some cases, older. They would discuss sexuality in very honest and very worldly terms. As obscenities and tawdry colloquialisms entered the mix, she would think of what her father did to her, and it made her feel cheap and dirty. It added a whole new layer to the trauma. One year, while Charlotte was attending university, she decided to take a stab at reconciliation and visit her family. Her father would not so much as acknowledge her presence. On another occasion when she visited, she asked her father if he would fix a mirror that kept falling out of place from its position in her suitcase. He didn't answer her appeal verbally, but she discovered hours later that he had glued the mirror back into place. The man who had done the unforgivable struggled to forgive his daughter for her objections to the man's myriad torments. Eventually they began to speak, even if they mostly communicated in a language of monosyllables. Chimpanzees covered more ground with sign language. Still, it was a start. After she graduated college, she met a man and they married. Her father approved of him and even walked Charlotte down the aisle. He still hasn't apologized for the abuse, however. Charlotte would suffer many physical and psychological health issues, a common outcome among abuse victims. She married and had children. Her relationships with men were troubled, another commonality among female victims of childhood sexual abuse. Writing her memoir was part of her healing process. Part 2, Zoe Annmarie Valenzuela. She's going to share her experience of sexual abuse at a very young age and how that's impacted her. Welcome, Zoe, to the show.
Hi, so happy to be here.
All right, so what I'm going to start off with is I want to get a picture of what your early childhood was like. So before the abuse happened, what was your family background like economically, and also was it a dysfunctional household or was it a happy household that you lived in?
Um, well, I'd say it was pretty dysfunctional. My biological dad left when I was around 2 years old. And then it was just me and my mom. My mom has a pretty long history of substance abuse. She's a lifelong methamphetamine addict. Um, so childhood was pretty interesting just based off that. Economically, very, very poor upbringing. Um, I mean, a lot of my memories before my abuser came into the picture are very minuscule. I don't have too many memories of my very early childhood, just a lot of running around with my mom, a lot of drug houses, a lot of her leaving me places, and then coming back a few days later. But most of, I'd say between like 2 and 5, I spent a majority of my time at my grandparents' house, being raised by my aunts and just other family members.
And is this a problem that persists with your mother to this day? Does she still have a drug problem?
Yeah, absolutely, she does.
Okay, and so at what age was it when the abuse began to occur?
Um, well, my most early memories of the grooming probably started around 5 or 6. Um, so
And
my,
and
oh,
who is it? Who is it that was responsible for this?
it is my stepdad, ex stepdad.
And what form did the grooming take?
Well, I remember he was always the family guy. He always wanted kids at his house. And he's also a drug abuser. I think that goes without saying. And I remember being over at his house with a bunch of us kids. Um, and the first memory I have that runs through my head all the time is I was jumping on his couch and I was wearing this dress. And I remember he told me to spread my legs open in the dress. Um, and I think that was the first incident of the grooming and how it started.
What's what you were standing and you spread your legs open, or you were sitting down?
Well, I was just like jumping on the couch, just
Yeah.
roughhousing with other kids, and he kind of singled me out and was like, "Hey," he said something like, "Do a trick for me and open your legs really wide and pretend you're doing a split." And as a kid, I mean, I didn't think anything of it, but that's definitely when it started. And then
Yeah.
over time, he just started having me come over more and more to babysit. And of course, my mother was off doing God knows what. So she had no problem letting me over there. But it started out that way. And then it started out with him having me sit on his lap. And he was obviously aroused. I didn't know this as a kid, but as the memories come back, I kind of piece it together. Um, But the genuine, not I don't want to say genuine, but the actual molestation started when him and my mother moved in together. I was about 6 and a half. Um, my mom used to work a lot, and the first occurrence, I was just playing with my brother and sister, and he had me come out into the living room and said, "Hey, let's watch a movie." And at this point, I still had trusted him, you know. I was just a kid, so um, and the movie that we watched, it was a pornographic film.
Really.
Yeah, and I remember Oh, this is so hard saying to somebody else. I
Being a
remember,
child, being such a small child, what was it like for you to watch something like that?
yeah, that's kind of what I was gonna get into. It's a very strange feeling because as a 6-year-old, you don't know what arousal is, but your body does.
Mm.
And I remember just this unexpected arousal that I mean, I'd never felt that at all until this point. Um, my hands got sweaty. I remember just playing with my toes, with the carpet, like I was just very nervous. Um, and he commented on that. Um, and he just told me to keep watching it and to not worry about what he was doing. And what he was doing is he was masturbating, and that was the first time I'd ever seen, a penis in ever. Um, and so that was the probably first time that it actually started. He didn't touch me that day. It was more just him forcing me to watch him touch himself.
And how did that impact you emotionally? Or was it, being so young and so tender, was it stressful on some level where you just couldn't, or it was more than you could take? Or
A little of both, I suppose. I didn't really know what to do. I remember him telling me, if you tell your mom about this, I will kill your brother and sister right in front of you. So that was, I didn't say a word. Um, and it kind of just progressed like that over, I'd say, a year or so. He just, that was kind of routine. My mom would go to work and we'd get home from school and he would have me out there for hours and just kind of watch me as I was uncomfortable.
and did it progress beyond molestation?
It did, yes.
I mean, without getting into graphic details that make you uncomfortable, um, I know that there can be certain medical complications that can occur in the event of penetration. Did anything like that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Between the ages of 6 to 11, I had constant, frequent UTIs, yeast infections, um, always had rashes. There was some vaginal bleeding at some parts. And I mean, uh, it was very obvious what was going on. My mother was aware.
She was
Um,
aware.
she was, yeah. I don't think at first, but at 8 years old, I had received this Tinkerbell diary for Christmas one year. And I started jotting down all of the abuse that was going on. And we had gotten evicted out of an apartment for the 30th time, I'm sure. And she was packing up all of my stuff while I was at school. When I got home from school, she had that diary and confronted me about it. And I just cried and told her, like, yes, this has been happening. And she actually blamed it on me.
Oh my God.
Yeah, she told me that it was my fault, that I shouldn't have been so careless, that I should have told her, and that if I didn't enjoy it, I would have told her. Um, and she said if she ever found anything like that again, that she would make sure I left the house.
That she would have kicked you out at a very young age.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Obviously, her moral compass was out of whack. She.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I make excuses for her, but there's no excuse for that. Definitely not.
Do you
She's
have?
actually she's a survivor of sexual abuse herself, which makes it even more disgusting.
You'd think she would know better.
Yeah, you'd think so.
Do you have a relationship with her now?
I do actually. Um, part of how this story is so crazy. I actually have a relationship with both of them, because it's kind of unavoidable. My brother currently still lives with the abuser. That's his dad. So, and now I'm a lot more open about it. You know, I don't hide it anymore, and it always makes my mother uncomfortable. But she just never really responds to my comments. You know, she's more of a deny it till she dies sort of person. But
Well,
yeah, she definitely knew about the abuse the whole time.
I'm wondering if also maybe on some level it was a bargain that you had with each other, where as long as he took care of you and she didn't have to, she could, do drugs and, you know, and that she wouldn't have to, worry about taking care of you. That,
Yeah, that definitely could have been part of it. She's a very childlike character. I think she definitely depended on his financial stability, and she just can never be alone. So there's also that.
well,
But
that's the thing about childhood abuse is that basically the victim's psychological aging process screeches to a halt, and they can't. Many of them can stay like in a childlike state for the rest of their life sometimes.
I've read a lot about that. I think that has definitely impacted my mother for sure.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like Michael Jackson was beaten throughout most of his childhood, and so he ended up being this very childlike person as an adult.
Yeah, yeah. That it wasn't just sexual abuse. Also, it's a very in-depth story of abuse. Um,
Also, there was more.
oh yeah, absolutely. The physical abuse started around the same time as the sexual abuse. Um, I definitely do have to say though that my brother got the absolute worst of it. There's three of us. There's me, my younger brother, and my youngest sister. Um, and it was very, very severe. Um, I believe he's broken my brother's ribs a total of 3 times in
Jesus.
the whole situation. Um,
Were you ever beaten when you resisted the sexual abuse?
as weirdly as it sounds, no. It was a very whiplash sort of abuse. I mean, he had so many different personalities, couldn't even keep up with them. But no, when the sexual abuse was occurring, he was very gentle, as gross as that sounds. Was never aggressive during the sexual abuse, which in a way I'm thankful for. But he was very aggressive and abusive.
And how old are you now?
I'm 23. I actually turned 24 on Monday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thanks.
So, how has the psychological aftermath of this affected you as an adult? Is it affecting your intimate relationships?
Oh, absolutely. Um, but I mean, I definitely think that the abuse and just the whole situation, I definitely grew up faster than I should have.
Yeah, your
And
innocence was robbed from you.
oh yeah, yeah, and I've done a really good job at getting all of that back. I've always grown up very self-aware, very, I don't want to say advanced, but definitely more intellectually knowledgeable than my peers. Um, and I mean, I've gone through therapy on and off throughout the years, definitely, but I think that most of the healing journey has just come from myself.
Hmm. And was it difficult in your childhood and adolescence to live this life where you're carrying around this dark secret about what's going on at home?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of the hardest parts was because it's just like, how did nobody say anything? Like, oh, it just infuriates me because we were very, very abused children and very poor. Like I was saying, like we didn't have beds in our room. Um, we slept on mats of blankets that hadn't been washed in months. Our clothes were never washed. If we did get new clothes, they came from the Goodwill.
And this was after the stepfather moved in?
Yeah, yeah. My mom, as shitty as she is, before he came into the picture, I think she was doing a lot better. Um, but yeah, we've always grown up really poor. And so yeah, I just don't know how any adults didn't intervene. That will always bother me. And it's
Or
definitely made me hyper vigilant in my adult life. I'm very quick to pick up on children that are in abusive situations, and I've always made sure to say something. So that's been good, at least.
well, how do you feel about your mother? Are you angry at her?
Yeah, I'm always gonna be angry at her. Um, she, it's a pretty tricky relationship. Um, she is dying. She has cancer. She needs double hip replacement. She's been through chemo. She's on her last few years. So it's definitely been harder to like keep away from her, I suppose. And as crazy as it is, like I'm sure after hearing all this, it's hard to believe, but she's a really good person, just not to her own children. She's a very like hippie gypsy sort of person.
Just not parent material.
Just not parent material, yeah. I mean, in high school, she was the first one that introduced me to drugs. She was the first one to hand me a shot of vodka. She was the first one to say, "Oh, have your friends come here, come party at our house." She was one of those parents.
Oh, she wanted to be the buddy parent, to be your friend
Yeah,
when you
that
needed
is
a parent. Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah. So was she often? You said she was absent. So did she disappear like days at a time?
Yes, they both did actually. I raised my brother and sister from the time I was 6 to 12. I'd say about 75% of the time. And I mean raised them as in I was the one that got up, got us dressed for school, walked us to the bus, made sure that they were okay, made dinner when I got home, bathed them, did their homework, read their story, put them to bed. It was like that every day. Sometimes they would say, "I'll be back in a few days. Here's money to go get groceries." And we lived in Phoenix, Phoenix, Arizona. They used to send me on the city bus to go get groceries. I think at 8 years old is when it started. They'd give me their food stamp card and a list of groceries, and I'd have to go get them. And if I didn't get them, it was a severe beating when I got home. I mean, they found every reason to physically abuse us. But yeah, sometimes there would be a note on the table that just said, "Hey, I left with so and so. I'll be back in a few days. Call your grandpa if you need anything." They would leave me the house keys and a grocery list, and we would be stuck there. And then sometimes they would just go in their bedroom for days at a time, spun the fuck out on meth. Um, and they had a bathroom in there, so they would just never come out. And then if we knocked on the door, they would come out to beat us and they'd go right back in.
Wow. And how did you? So the relatives that helped take care of you, were they resentful about the situation?
Well, I can say that some of them were, I suppose, but again, not resentful enough to stop it. Um, and that's also where the empathy for my mother comes from, because the family that she came from and my family, it's always been dysfunctional. They have been hiding sexual abuse for decades, you know. I My biological dad has told me so much throughout the years as we've repaired our relationship. Um, and my grandfather definitely abused my mother as well, her own dad.
Sexually abused her?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, there was a lot of just a lot of family incest that has
has,
been swept under the rug.
has there been any inbreeding?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Hmm.
I surely hope not.
So,
I've
how
done
do you?
I've done a lot of digging over the years, trying to find as much truth as I can, and that has not come up. I hope it does not.
How do? How do your siblings feel about the way that you all grew up?
Well, my brother, like I said, he definitely got the worst of the physical abuse. My goodness. He was a bedwetter for obvious reasons, and he still is actually to this day, because of those reasons. And he lives with his dad, with the abuser. Um, and I'm sure it's triggering for him. I don't know how he does it, but it's really crazy how our minds just kind of form with the abuse. You know, eventually it just becomes part of everything, so it's not seen as abnormal.
Yeah, you're
And
in survival mode.
yeah, and I think that's definitely what's happened with my brother. And I've tried to tell him a few times over the past 4 years or so what has happened with the sexual abuse. And I just don't think he's ready to hear it. I don't hold that against him. I just don't think he can handle that information and still have a relationship with his dad. So I think
Yeah,
he
that would be
chooses
difficult.
to believe otherwise. And
And
my sister, She actually got she actually got lucky out of the three of us. She doesn't remember anything. All of her stuff is suppressed, which I'm in a way thankful for, but I do know that one day it will come out, and I will be here for her when that happens.
and what I was about to ask you was, your those experiences with the sexual abuse, have they affected the way that you react to men?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Um, yeah, I'm very hypervigilant, almost to the point of overwhelm. It's been very hard to find stable relationships, because in my mind I just don't trust anybody. And I
Hmm.
have my own daughter now as well. um, and that was a huge problem with my child's father, because he's fantastic. But I was just always on the lookout, you know. I would never let him like change her diaper without observing him. I was always cautious if she had to take a bath, or if she had to be changed, like her clothes, you know. I've always just been so observant to the point of unnecessary, I suppose. But to me it feels necessary, you know. I never want her in any position to be harmed.
Have you brought her around your relatives?
I have brought her around my mom, yeah, and my other relatives. I have not brought her to visit my brother. My brother's met her. He recently moved back to his dad, but we all lived in Phoenix for quite a few years. So he was around her then, but no, I have not um, introduced my abuser and my daughter. Definitely not.
And yeah, you said your mom introduced you to drugs and alcohol at well, criminally underage, criminally
Yeah,
young age,
probably about freshman year. I had to have been like 14, I'm sure.
14. And
Yeah,
did you end up developing a substance abuse problem?
I didn't actually, um, thankfully. I mean, I definitely went through a drinking phase in high school, and I definitely went through a hypersexualized phase in high school. I think that has to be brought up. Because I just read that a lot in sexual abuse survivors, that some of us get very hypersexualized, and that definitely happened for me. I was very
Yeah.
promiscuous. I was definitely promiscuous with very older men, like, 20, 30s even, and they of course were predators as well, but I just didn't know that at the time.
So did you have these encounters with them when you were underage?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I conducted this.
Consensually, but I mean, a child can't consent, but at the time I thought that I was consenting, but that is not true.
No, it isn't. Yeah, I once conducted this little sociological experiment where I asked all these women I knew, when you were, in your teens or, 12, 14, whatever, did you have men uh, hit on you? And by men, I meant 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And they all invariably said yes. They had
Yeah,
all experienced that.
without a doubt, yes.
So, but I don't know, maybe in your case, I don't know if there's something about having had the experience that you did with abuse that maybe made you especially vulnerable to that.
Yeah, I think in a way because, it went on for a very long time. Um, I think the last time he raped me, I was 12. Um, and that was actually, I had actually told somebody. Um, I was at a birthday party and it was one of my best friends, which I have never been able to find her throughout all these years. But her name's Janaea. And I was like, I have a secret, us little kids. I was like, you can't tell anybody. And I just whispered to her, my dad likes to touch me where he shouldn't. And, as a 12-year-old, you don't know how to respond to that. And I remember her saying, I have to tell my mom this isn't okay. And I remember just freaking out. I was crying. I was begging her, don't tell, because, he had been fucking manipulating me and scaring the hell out of me for years at this point. So I genuinely thought something bad was going to happen to my siblings. Um, and I remember just freaking out about it. And she promised me that she wouldn't tell her mom. The birthday party was over, and I went home. It was about 6 o'clock, and at about 8 p.m., two officers knocked on our door. We were staying with family at the time. And yeah, two officers knocked on the door and said that there had been an anonymous reporting of child abuse and that they needed my mom and my abuser and me to go to downtown Phoenix to be interrogated by some officers. So we went down there, and a lot of this is a blur. I'll just say that now. I think I've definitely uh, kind of exited the situation mentally. There's still a lot of memories that haven't fully came up, but what I do remember is just being in this small gray room with this uncomfortable couch, and I could hear my mom screaming in the next room, saying that I was a liar, saying that he would never do that, and I could hear him screaming at the officers, saying that all I do is cause trouble, that he tries to do the best that he can. And I just heard them both screaming at these officers. And I'm just sitting in this room and I can't say anything. Um, and it kind of goes blurry after that. But then I remember my mom coming out and I remember her looking at me and telling me, "You're never setting foot in my house again." And, as a kid, I just lost it. I told her I'm so sorry. I told her I'm lying. I ended up recanting everything that I said.
Oh,
I told the
God.
officers I made it up. My mom told them that I did stuff like this for attention a lot, and that it just wasn't true. And they dropped it. They dropped all the charges.
God, that must have been devastating.
Oh yeah, it still is. I think that's the most painful part. Is like, how do you look? Sorry. I look at my daughter and I just could never imagine doing that to your child, you know? Like you just have to be a special kind of fucked up. Abuse, whether she was abused or not, there's just no excuse for that. And that's probably the most painful thing still. Because as crazy as it sounds, I have forgiven my abuser. Throughout high school, I went through I don't want to say Stockholm syndrome period, but kind of. That's the best I can describe it. My mom they ended up splitting up. She got a new boyfriend, moved out, and she gave us the choice, us kids, if we wanted to stay with him or go with her, and we all chose to stay with him. And during that time, there was no abuse. It had stopped. I was in my teens. The physical and sexual abuse had stopped for me. The physical abuse did not stop for my brother, and it still hasn't. But um, and during this time, I was drinking a lot, and I was having all these house parties and stuff. But there was a lot of times where it would just be me and him, and we would be drinking a bottle of whiskey, super drunk. Which is, I know it sounds so crazy. Like, how could I sit in a situation like this with this person that did this to me? But it just kind of happened like that. And I remember asking him several times why he did that to me. And the first time I asked him, he denied it, said I was crazy, and said he never wanted to hear about it again. But he refused to look at me when he said it, and there was so much gaslighting and so much like just him confusing the hell out of me. So sometimes I would question my own everything, like sometimes I really did convince myself like, oh, none of this happened. I'm making all this up. And that's why I wanted to ask him. And the second time I asked him, which is the most memorable time, because I was very intoxicated. The second time he broke down, he said that he has struggled with feelings of attraction towards children for a very long time. Um, and he said that he just couldn't resist that urge anymore. And he apologized. Um, and it was hard to hear, it was very hard to hear your rapist say, I know I did this to you and I don't know why, but I'm sorry. But it was very healing because even though he is all of these terrible things, and I'm not defending him in any sort of way, but the situation and the relationship was always so confusing because besides all of that abuse, um, he was a great person. You know, he there would be times when they would be sober because sometimes meth addicts go through like this period of soberness. And in the few weeks that they would be sober, they would be completely different people. We would be this perfect little happy family. They'd take us out to eat. They would spend time with us. We'd watch movies and, you
Clean the
know,
house,
do the whole thing. Um,
do the laundry, clean the house. Did that get done finally, or
yeah, like there would be these weird periods of grace, I guess, and they would act like parents for a little while. They'd go to our school functions and like do all this stuff and that is probably one of the hardest parts too, the fucking whiplash from that. Because as a kid, you don't realize that it's going to go back to the abuse, that it's going to go back to them hiding in the bedroom for days and days. I guess as a kid, you just don't comprehend that it's not always going to be this good, So every time the good times would end, it was like it was just a complete fucking reality shock. And that was I think that was definitely one of the hardest parts.
And it was interesting. I was interested to know. So when you and your siblings chose to stay with him instead of go with your mother, what was your reasoning for doing so?
Well, my mother's boyfriend at that time was just a different sort of abusive. He was just very possessive, very controlling, very scary. I know that sounds weird because obviously my abuser was scary too, but it was just more comfortable. I all my friends came over there. My brother and sister had their own room finally, and I had my own room finally, which that was the first time that ever happened. And he actually took the living room. So we were just more comfortable, and it was just easier, I suppose.
Okay, so and what kind of life did your mother have with the new guy?
Oh, super chaotic.
Was he a drug addict too?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, they ended up getting an apartment and I'd go over there on weekends sometimes, but I never usually stayed. And during my high school years, like I tried my absolute hardest to never be in that house as well, which I feel guilty about now because I did subject my brother and sister to, you know, being there with him but as I got older, I just couldn't take on as much as I was when I was younger. Like me and my brother, we um we would take the abuse for my sister at every opportunity that we could. Like she definitely got the least of it because of me and my brother. But yeah, through my high school years, I mean, I moved out with my friends. I moved out with multiple boyfriends. I was always in and out of the house. Um, so I guess that also made it easier for me. I didn't really have to be there.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, you had very little stability from the sounds of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I ended up moving in with one of my boyfriend's families for a really long time, about 4 years, and that was the most stable I had been, and it was that was also very healing. They they knew about the abuse, and so did my boyfriend at the time. And they were just fantastic. They welcomed me with open arms and treated me as part of the family, and they would let my siblings come over, and I'm very, very thankful to that family. I don't think I would be as resilient as I am if I would not have met those people. I'm very thankful.
Oh, that's great. How old is your daughter now?
She is 19 months. She turns 2 in May.
Oh, cool. So, are you do you have so you and your her father, are you guys in a relationship now?
Not currently. We're not. It's still pretty rocky, I suppose. But that's just based on other events. It doesn't have anything to do with my own situation. Just
Oh yeah.
some need to grow up a little bit, that's all.
Oh yeah. What do you do for a living?
I'm actually just a factory worker at the moment. I recently moved from Phoenix back to my, I guess not hometown, but this is where I feel home, and I'm back in Arkansas now. A little southern small town.
And so yeah, you grew up in this very chaotic atmosphere with adult role models who clearly just were lost as human beings. Has it been difficult for you to try to piece together a concept of what it's like to be an adult?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it definitely has. Just like even basic things, like paying the bills on time and learning how to manage money and just learning how to be stable. That's definitely been a struggle. But I have support now. My biological father came back into my life right around, I'd say 15 permanently. Um, and I had learned so much. My mom had filled my head with honestly complete bullshit the whole time about my dad. And he cleared that up definitely. And it's been 9 years now, and we are very close. He calls me, probably once a day. We're very actively involved in each other's lives. He's married, and his wife is fantastic. She's the first actual mother figure I've had that is stable. So they're the biggest, most positive influence that I have now. And they've definitely helped me navigate throughout life.
Does he know about the abuse you experienced?
He knows the basics. My dad's very sensitive, and he already has so much shame, so much guilt for, my childhood and him just not being there as much as he could have been. So I just would want to spare him the details. I actually told them both that I was so excited to talk to Morgan Rector.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I advised him not to listen.
Oh, so I mean, so and what he does know, how did he react to it?
He cried. He, sobbed pretty deeply, I would say.
Did he
Which
feel? Does
wasn't
he
like
feel? Does he feel guilty? Like if he had been there, it wouldn't have happened. That
yeah,
sort of thing.
absolutely, yeah. And that breaks my heart. My dad is he's just amazing. And I am so angry at my mother for that as well. She's such a selfish, empty person. She definitely robbed me of that relationship. He tried to, because he's still fighting for citizenship in America actually, but and he's doing really great. It's just a ridiculously long process.
Where's he from?
He's from Mexico.
Mexico, yeah.
Yeah, but he's been here 45 years, his whole life. So it's a fucked up situation. The American immigration system is not the best, as I'm sure you know. Um, but
Well, I
yeah,
know.
he tried to come through my life multiple times throughout my childhood, and my mom, my dad, did suffer from substance abuse as well, but he got sober pretty early on. He's been sober, I think, almost 20 years now, um, which is great. He's a completely different person. I don't even know the person that my mother knew or everybody else knew. I've never seen that side of him. But every time he would try to come back into my life, she would threaten to have him deported or threaten to do who knows what to him. And eventually, he just kind of stayed away, which I do understand that. My mom is, I wouldn't want to deal with her either in that situation.
No, it's very odd. I mean, she wasn't doing a very good job. Excuse me, a very good job of parenting. So you'd think,
Oh, yeah.
maybe she'd
You'd
she'd
think
at least.
she'd be like, here, take her. But no, like I said, very selfish. Selfish to the point of, oh God, I don't even know. Like she's a shitty parent. And she's always been a shitty parent. And I remember when I first turned 18, I was hell bent on getting legal guardianship over both my siblings. And she fought that with everything inside of her. It's the hardest I think I've seen her fight for anything. Honestly, it's like she doesn't want to take care of her fucking kids, but she doesn't want anybody else to have them either. It's very weird. It's very frustrating.
How old are they now?
Um, my sister just turned 18 in December, and my brother turned 19 in September of last year. So we're all of age now, thank goodness.
Or is there any indication that they're going to leave soon?
Um, Unfortunately, no. My sister still lives with my mom and my dysfunctional ass family in Phoenix. But she has a good boyfriend, and I think they're pretty serious, and I'm hoping that she takes the leap with him and gets the hell out of there. He's a really good kid, and he's in the Navy, I believe, and he's a really good kid. So I hope that that's her ticket out, because that's how I got out. It's by finding somebody who's willing to make, like, who's willing to make me see, like, hey, this isn't okay. There's another side of life. So I hope that he does that for her. And my brother's a hard situation. We're very close. You know, he calls every couple days, and we're the type to stay on the phone for hours on end. We just there's just certain subjects we don't talk about, and all of our abuse just happens to be one of them. But I also, like, it's just it's a hard balance. I have to respect his choices in order to stay in his life, you know? Because if I were to come on too strong and be like, hey, this person did this to you and this person did this to me, and you living with him is completely fucking terrible and you need to get out, like, that would just be too much for him. So I kind of just have to remain in the middle and do the best I can to support him regardless.
Yeah, exactly. Um, and so, do you think, this whole thing with your daughter and being hyper protective of her? Do you think that's going to get worse as she's older, like when she's a teenager? Because ultimately, females are preyed upon more than ever at that age. Do you think that's
Um,
how? How do you look upon that time in
uh,
her life?
that is one of the things that keeps me up at night, terrified. Um, and I mean, even if I didn't go through the abuse that I did, I think I'd feel that way. But and honestly, listening to human monsters definitely doesn't help.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
terrifies me more. But I'd rather be educated than not educated, so I listen. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's just it's overwhelmingly terrifying to a point that I can't even explain. I just plan to be as open and honest with her as I can. I'm definitely, when the time is right and when I feel like she's emotionally intelligent enough to handle it, I will absolutely tell her about my abuse, my situation. And I'm not going to shelter her from the world. I don't think I'm going to be like that, but I definitely am going to make sure that she goes through the world with very, very open eyes. Very, I want her to have her own sense of hypervigilance in a healthy way, you
And
know.
speaking of hypervigilance, it must be a very tense situation whenever you're dating and you meet a guy and you introduce him to your daughter. Is that like, are you like really watching him like a hawk? Like,
Oh
make
yeah.
sure he's not looking at her in the wrong way.
Yeah, definitely. And the split with her dad has it was pretty recent. So I've actually only introduced her to one other person, and that person is just amazing. He has a daughter of his own, and I remember having a conversation with him, telling him, like, I basically told him, I look at you like you are a pedophile, and until I see otherwise, I am going to believe that. And he was just like, you know what? I completely understand. And he's a fantastic human being. That's really all I can say. He definitely, definitely a good guy. And he's not a pedophile. So we're good on that. But,
Well,
yeah.
have you looked into like the local sex offender registry to see who's on
Um,
it?
I refuse to do that. That's just a little bit too much.
I once had a look at one of those, and it occurred to me at one point, I don't have enough time to read this. It seemed to go on forever. They're so long. And
Yeah, that just absolutely terrifies me. And I mean, I've been in this town, like I grew up in this town. We moved here. We moved here actually after all that interrogation stuff with the cops, because of course my parents wanted to dip out of that situation. So they moved us out here to Arkansas when I was about 12, 13. Um, and so, yeah, I'm terrified to look at that list because I know so many people in this town. I mean, we're talking population like 5,000. So it's a very small community. So, yeah, I'm terrified to look at that list. I don't think I ever will.
yeah, and I've noticed sometimes they don't notify the police when they move either. They just leave, and so you
Yeah.
don't know where they might have gone, or maybe they just
Yeah, I've actually heard about other countries like Germany, Switzerland, just off the top of my head. They've actually been handling their pedophilia a lot differently than America. And I think it's definitely worth looking into. I think that, I don't know, obviously they're terrible, shitty people, but I think the more we sweep all this under the rug and kind of stigmatize it and make it a taboo subject, I think it leaves more room for these abusers to offend. You know, as crazy as it sounds, I wish that I wish that people were more open to giving these people treatment, to giving them therapy. You know, I genuinely believe that if my abuser, if you know, because he had disclosed that he had had these thoughts since he was a teenager. You know, if somebody would have caught that, or if there was a resource for young men or even women offenders, because that definitely happens. If there are resources that these pedophiles could go to, I think that there would be a lot less offending pedophiles. I actually
yeah.
listened to this other podcast, psychology psychologist in Seattle, I believe, and he did this whole interview, and he interviewed a non-offending pedophile, and it was absolutely fascinating to me. I think I've listened to it like 3 times now, um, and it was just so crazy to process that there are people out there who don't want to be this way, you know. And I think
Yeah.
that if they had help, I think we could definitely um, not fix the situation, but definitely limit the abuse that happens to children if we looked at it a different way.
Well, that's the problem. There are a lot of therapists who don't want to treat them. They just have
Right.
they just the way they feel is they hate them so much that they would not be able to be impartial and treat them
Yeah.
like another patient. But if they did treat them, if they did make it possible for them to navigate their way through society without offending, they'd be doing a very valuable public service.
I agree 100%. Yeah. And these other countries, they are doing that successfully. And it's pretty crazy to hear about. I also listened to On the Edge with Andrew Gold. I think that's his name. And he really dives into that too. And yeah, there's definitely other countries that are making waves with pedophilia treatment, and that's what they call it. There's a clinic in Germany. It's a 24/7 clinic where pedophiles can go in there, whether they've offended or not, and just get help. And it's done amazing things statistically, at least. I think it's been going on for like 3 years now, I believe. But yeah, yeah, I think that there's definitely a better way we could handle these situations, especially a situation like mine, because I know it's happening right now as we speak, and it's happening everywhere in the world, you know, where it's these like weird, uh, deep sort of family sexual abuse issues, you know, where it's
Yeah,
just
over
it's just
40
impossible to unravel.
over 40% of offenders are members of the family.
Right, yeah. And that's insane. It's just so crazy to me.
There's a really great documentary you can watch on YouTube. It's called Incest: A Family Tragedy, and it deals with incest, but it also deals with pedophilia in a general sense. And they brought together a group of these pedophiles who get together as, I guess, a support group or something. And it's kind of galling to hear them talk about their crimes in such a straightforward way, but
It
yeah,
is.
it's really
Oh,
interesting.
yeah, I'll definitely look into that. Yeah. I I've really considered actually becoming one of those therapists, which is so crazy, but I think my experience with it and with pedophiles in general would definitely be helpful to society, and just for everybody involved. It's definitely a problem that needs to be addressed instead of ignored.
Yeah, and prevention is as important as
Yeah,
prosecution, you know.
yeah, absolutely. And it is hard because there is a lot of emotional feelings that come up. It's very hard for somebody to separate themselves from their own personal feelings. And for me, it's not, and I think that's because I've been able to sit beside a pedophile, a child rapist, and have a meaningful conversation, many meaningful conversations, and kind of recognize that these people do feel, I don't want to say all of them, some of them, they do feel guilt and shame, and they just kind of got lost in a society that wants nothing to do with them. And then, of course, we are the victims, which isn't fair to
Yeah.
us. So,
Well, one thing I've always been curious about in terms of the promiscuity that many victims go through is is it possible maybe on some level you were reclaiming power over your sexuality?
I told myself that for a long time. Um, but now at this age, I don't think so. I think it was a comfort thing, honestly, even a self-sabotaging thing. Um, yeah, I don't know about that.
Hmm. Or yeah, maybe it was just something that you were so used to that
Yeah,
it
I
was your
think it was
norm.
just
Yeah.
a toxic reaction to the abuse. Like, I didn't really know anything else, so my brain was like, well, this is comfortable, so let's just keep doing this. But I mean, now as an adult, when I look back at my 15, 16, even 17-year-old self having sexual relations with 20, 30, 35-year-old men, like that just they were also predators. So yeah, I don't think it was good at all.
Have you suffered any physical long-term effects from the abuse you suffered when you were a child?
That is undetermined.
Like when you were
I
pregnant, did you
absolutely.
experience a lot of complications that may have arisen from it?
I actually had a very pretty easy pregnancy, so no, but I do believe that there was severe damage done vaginally just throughout the years. Um, any sexual interaction I have is painful. I've been diagnosed with endometriosis, and as I have gotten those ultrasounds and gone through treatment, my gynecologist has definitely pointed out the internal scarring over the years. Um, and
And
it's
what
just
kind of
caused like a abnormal, I wouldn't say shrinking, but I suppose in a way of like the vaginal canal of my body just trying to heal itself from being so young throughout those years, that it's kind of just not where it should be, I suppose.
does that cause you any discomfort?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so, well, I mean, did that affect the actual birth? Like, with it?
Weirdly, it didn't. I actually I did my birth a whole different way. I went to a birthing center, had a midwife, no medication, did my labor in a bathtub for 12 hours. Like I did it the whole kind of hippie way. Um, and no, it was actually really really smooth and stress free, and but I put a lot of effort into it being that way because they told me because of my endometriosis, and endometriosis for the record is when your uterine lining grows on the outside of your uterus instead of on the inside.
Mm.
Um, so I don't think that had anything to do with the sexual abuse, at least not to my knowledge. But that was the endometriosis is the most concerning thing during my pregnancy. But it all went as smooth as it could possibly go. So I'm thankful for that. I don't know how that happened, but definitely thankful. Yeah, I was
And how
definitely worried about that throughout my pregnancy.
and how about the impact on your mental health? Are you a happy person, or do you suffer from any depression or anxiety?
Um, yeah. So I actually got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder at 16. And that's been a wild ride,
Mm.
to say the least. But I've definitely
Psychologists call that a fatal disease in their profession because it's
they do.
untreatable.
Yeah, yeah, uh, yeah, and it's very stigmatized as well. Um, it's been hard, but I think how I've gotten through it is just for some reason, uh, my experience has given me such an open mind, and such a self awareness that I can't even express in words. And that's definitely helped me with my mental illness because even in the worst parts of the mental illness, I'm still able to separate myself from that and be like, hey, this isn't who we want to be. You have something to achieve. You have a daughter, and we're not going to do this. And I kind of ground myself and seek treatment. Um, and that's just what I've been doing. I have therapy once a week. It used to be twice a week, but I have improved. So yeah, I mean with BPD, it's a fucking uphill climb every day. But it's just person to person. It's almost like a drug addiction. If you want to get better, you'll get better. And I know
Yeah.
that I don't want that to sound invalidating for anybody because, oh God, I don't want to be invalidating at all. But you just have to find that fucking resilience. You have to find it, or it will take you. And I just made the choice that I would do everything I could to not let that abuse win. I want to be better than these shitty people. I just want to be better.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you've got everything. You really got your life together, as opposed to your mom, the drug addict. Who,
Yeah, statistically, I should be also a meth head with 5 different kids living under a bridge.
yeah.
Uh, but
Well,
I definitely made a point to do the exact opposite.
what are your life goals? What would you like to accomplish?
Um,
By the age of 30 or something.
by 30, well, I definitely am going to start my own podcast. You've been a huge inspiration.
Oh, thank you.
And so has Jordan Harbinger, which one of your advertisements actually led me right to him.
Oh
And
yeah, yeah.
absolutely love Jordan Harbinger. Oh my God, just fantastic conversations like that. That is like my type of person, like the intellectual conversations that he has and the questions that he has. I just love it. So I definitely want to start a podcast just as a hobby. I want to start interviewing people that have stories like mine. I want to eventually interview non-offending pedophiles and let them educate people on what they struggle with and what prevention looks like and that there is hope. I'd actually love to interview my abuser one day. That's definitely on the list, just for my own self healing, you know. So that's just a small term goal that I'll do on the side. But my main goal is to buy a huge plot of land and
Hmm.
build a self-sustainable sort of cob house and grow my own food and live as self-sustainably as possible, and find a source of passive income that will generate enough wealth for me to provide my daughter with everything that she needs and to also provide us with the freedom to travel. I would love to get out of this bubble of America that we live in. I'd love to see the world. That's a huge, huge priority for me, definitely.
Yeah, come up here to Canada sometime.
Oh, yeah. You
We can.
guys wouldn't be able to get rid of me. I'd be stuck.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you so much, Zoe, for doing the show.
Thank
It's a
you. I'm
great.
still fangirling. I can't believe
Oh,
it. Morgan Rector, like, you're just fantastic.
well, thank you.
I love your work.
When you get your show going, I would be happy to include it on my YouTube channel if you decide you'd like to go that route. I have about
Absolutely. I'd
29.
love to interview you. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, sure. I have 28,000 subscribers there, so I can
Yeah,
help get it going. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you have so much to say. Like, I have to ask. We're already on the phone. How do you emotionally handle what you read, what you research?
Well,
Because
I
some of the
I had a
tools you put
child.
out, oh man, I've stayed up. Like, they just gotten me to my core. How do you do it?
Well, I had a childhood chock full of trauma, so I know what it's like to be in survival mode and to take all that on. So it's like Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. So I know what it's like to sometimes. Um, well, I guess I'm also reminded of this quote. It was in a book called Night by Elie Wiesel. He was a Holocaust survivor, and there was this one incident, I guess you could call it, where they had to go from one camp to another, and the other camp, I think it was like 10 miles away, and the train they were supposed to take broke down. So they just made them run there. And it was at night and it was freezing cold. And the ones who couldn't make it the entire distance were shot. And so he decided, like, I'm going to be like a machine. I'm just going to run. I'm going to ignore all signs of tiredness. So I guess maybe emotionally it's like that too. It's just like being mechanical, you just keep going. So
Yeah, I listen to your podcast when I'm at work, because it's just 8 hours of meaningless packing frozen chicken in a box. Like, it's very, very tiring, boring work. So I listen to you most of the day sometimes, and oh man, sometimes I'm just standing on the line and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I have to I have to go to the bathroom, I have to pause this. Like, I gotta take a break. So I commend you for what you do. It's fantastic. I really love it. And I know a bunch of us do too. I've shown so many people your podcast by now. And
oh,
I've
thank
warned
you
them.
very
I've
much.
had to warn them, like, hey, go into this, trigger warning. Take it one day at a time.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for helping to spread the word. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much, Zoe, for doing the
Thank
show.
you. Thank you so much.
All
I
right.
hope you have a great night.
Yes, best of luck to you.
Yes,
Take
thanks.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.